4, 3, 2, and 1.
Welcome to the Brisbane City Council meeting of May 18th, 2023. I'm calling this meeting to order at 7:37 p.m. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Councilmember Cunningham?
Here.
Councilmember Lance?
Here.
Councilmember Mackin?
Here.
And Councilmember O'Connell?
Here.
And Mayor Davis.
Here. Report out from closed session.
Yes, Madam Mayor. Item D was put over for more information. Item E, staff was given direction. Item F, staff was given direction. And item item G, staff was given direction. On item F, for the employee evaluation, no report out, but there was an element of staff direction there as well.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the adoption of the agenda. Do I have a first and second?
So moved.
I believe staff wanted to pull item I.
Okay.
Okay.
With that removal of item I, I'll adopt the agenda.
And I'll second.
Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Cunningham?
Aye.
Councilmember Lance?
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin?
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell?
Aye.
And Mayor Davis.
Aye. That brings us to oral communications number 1. Is there a member of the public wishing to speak at this time on any items that are not on the agenda?
Madam Mayor, I see no raised hands and have not received any written correspondences.
Okay, we'll move on to item B, proclaiming May as Mental Health Month. May 2023 is Mental Health Month, whereas in 2021, one out of every 8 San Mateo County adults likely had serious psychological distress in the past year. From 2019 to 2021, San Mateo County youth grades 7 and 11 reported chronic sadness and hopelessness, 29 and 43% respectively, in the past 12 months. And whereas every day millions of people face stigma related to mental health and substance abuse conditions and may feel isolated and alone, going years before receiving help if left untreated. Have life expectancy is 25 years shorter than the general population. And whereas while mental health conditions are common across all types of demographics, certain communities face inequitable access to services, including people of color, LGBTQ+ community, youth, and older adults. Whereas mental health and substance use conditions are treatable health conditions, and people who have mental health and substance use conditions can recover and lead full and meaningful lives. Whereas the San Mateo County Behavioral Health and Recovery Services Office of Diversity and Equity, Mayor's Mental Health Initiative, and partners are collectively organizing activities that our community can participate in throughout the month, including free in-person and virtual events, advocacy days, and a social media campaign. The 2023 theme is #ShareForMH. Ongoing updates posted at www.smchealth.org/MHM. And now, therefore, be it resolved that the City of Brisbane hereby recognizes May 2023 as Mental Health Month to enhance public awareness of mental health, to help end the stigma and direct members of the community to resources and support for mental health and substance use conditions. And San Mateo County Behavioral Health Commissioner Leticia Bito is here to accept the proclamation.
Good evening. City Mayor, council members, city manager, staff, and residents of Brisbane, thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Leticia Bito. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a member of the Behavioral Health Commission, and just for some background, the commission is committed to the goals of promoting wellness and recovery. We work strongly to enhance public awareness and knowledge of mental health and substance use conditions and eliminating stigma. And so we just want to deeply thank the City of Brisbane for proclaiming that this month is Mental Health Month. We really appreciate all the efforts, specifically, just even pulling in today and seeing the lawn sign. We also know that there has, certainly been a lot of commitment, and we're just very grateful. We want to also share that May Mental Health Month is observed across San Mateo County, California, and the United States. And this lime green ribbon I'm wearing, I'm sure for many is familiar, but perhaps not for everyone in the community. And so we want to certainly acknowledge and share that this lime green is the national color for mental health. It represents how we want to bring a bright light, that neon green, bright light to an important issue that may be hidden or is seen negatively. And so obviously, this is not just an opportunity, it certainly is an opportunity for us to highlight it in the month of May, but it really is a daily commitment that, I'm sure we're all both here present and, of course, our commission is really devoted to ensuring that we do our very best to reduce the stigma as a community, that we connect people to services, we promote wellness for mental health and substance use conditions. This year, the details of the campaign, thank you, Mayor Davis, for sharing. It is a hashtag share for the number 4MH. And we just encourage everyone to use social media to share the ways in which they certainly take care of their mental wellness. There are a variety of events, and we just I personally want to just highlight a few of them that are occurring this very weekend. But I will like to direct everyone's attention, of course, to the website smchealth.org/MHM for Mental Health Month. And just on a personal note, my decision to be a part of the Behavioral Health Commission and to serve my community in this capacity has been abundantly significant in my life as I look back to the points in my life, whether as an undergrad, just going through transitions in life as a first-time mom and dealing with, certainly the highs and lows of motherhood. And really seeking community. And I, when I think about certainly my experiences as an undergrad, dealing with the stress and being away from home, looking also, fast forwarding it to, even parenting and experiences that I've had relationally, I can't stress enough how having mental health support and services has made all the difference. And I just want to encourage everyone to help be a spark of conversation around mental health. I know that when I share my journey, it is an experience that really is connected, and it sort of weaves together the opportunity to share with other family members and friends the importance of seeking mental health services. I just want to reiterate, we do have wonderful events this month. We certainly do encourage that, we do our best on social media to be able to also share the importance of this month. And then also, lastly, it's very important, I think, for us to recognize the work that the county is doing in collaboration with the cities, and just to be able to magnify the importance of seeking mental health services and working together, community partners, all layers of the county to be able to really make an impact and support our neighbors and certainly for our own benefit as well. So just want to take the time again to acknowledge with deep gratitude for the community here at Brisbane that has been kind enough to recognize May as Mental Health Month.
Thank you. And I will hand this to you.
Madam Mayor,
Thank
I have a
you.
quick question.
Sure.
One quick question, just to clarify for our audience and us. It's hashtag the number 4MH, correct?
Share.
Very good question. So it's hashtag share,
Share.
the number 4MH.
Thank you.
Yes. Hashtag share 4MH.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move on to proclaiming May 21st through 27th as National Public Works Week. National Public Works Week proclamation, May 21 through 27, 2023, connecting the world through public works. Whereas public works professionals focus on infrastructure, facilities, and services that are of vital importance to sustainable and resilient communities and to the public health, high quality of life, and well-being of the city of Brisbane. And whereas these infrastructure, facilities, and services could not be provided without the dedicated efforts of public works professionals who are engineers, managers, and employees at all levels of government, who are responsible for rebuilding, improving, and protecting our city's transportation, water supply, water treatment, and solid waste systems, public buildings, and other structures and facilities essential for our community members. And whereas it is in the public interest for the residents, business leaders, and the next generation to gain knowledge of and to maintain an ongoing interest and understanding of the importance of public works and their program. And whereas the year 2023 marks the 63rd annual National Public Works Week, sponsored by the American Public Works Association, be it now resolved, I, Madison Davis, hereby designate the week May 21 through 27, 2023 as National Public Works Week. I urge all citizens to pay tribute to our public works professionals, engineers, managers, and employees, and to recognize the substantial contributions they make to protecting our health, safety, and quality of life. And City Engineer Randy Bro is here to accept the proclamation. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, should we? Okay.
Oh, should I get back there? All right, here.
Do you want me to come down? Because I have a lot of stuff. I have a lot of stuff on my. There's the thing. I don't know.
So Mayor Pro Tem Council, thank you so much for this. You will note that there is a lack of crew here in the building tonight, and that was actually a conscious decision on my part. And that decision was based on the significant amount of overtime, much of it mandatory call-out time that the field crews experience, and the ongoing work that the office crews have had fixing things that are still broken in our system from those storms that happened in January, February, and March, and the continuing efforts that we're doing with the FEMA and the grant process. So I chose not to issue an invite here. Those invites are sometimes referred to by the crew as randatory, which is a portmanteau developed in the corporation yard. It's a mashup of the phrases, Randy asked us to come, but it's also voluntary. I mean, it's also mandatory to show up. So I didn't do that again. I hope that they are home with their families, enjoying the time off they deserve, knowing that they are well respected by their community, by this council, and that their work is appreciated. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, may I ask one question of Randy?
Yes.
Randy, I just want to bring to our citizens' attention one thing that you said at the last meeting that has stuck in my head, that in a lot of the drainage pipes throughout Brisbane, they are at 50% capacity even after we've spent all of that time and all of that money cleaning them out from those horrible storms. So when people are coming forward and asking for money for things that might make something look pretty, we really need to bring to their attention that this is such an important thing for us to be spending our money on. Certainly doesn't look sexy. We're never going to see it. It's underground. But folks who is listening, ask Randy Barrow, our pipes are half full of mud and debris still from those storms, correct?
You are absolutely correct, and I very much appreciate you bringing that to attention because a lot of what we do isn't sexy. The stuff that's underground, you don't see it. You don't see us fixing it. Sometimes you wonder why the heck we're digging up the roads and making your commute harder, but it's necessary to live this very comfortable first world life we live. I tell people I didn't take this line of business to have people applaud me every day. You know, when people in public works complain, I say, well, if you want to make somebody happy every day, maybe you should go buy an ice cream truck and drive around because people will always be happy to see you. But in this business, we get complaints when we inconvenience people. It's our job to not have complaints, though. I don't want somebody to call me and say, hey, Randy, you know, I got up this morning and man, I ran the water and it made my coffee and I took a shower and all the waste went away and I drove to town and the streetlights were working. That's what you expect. And that's what we work very hard to do, and we do it in the background. And sometimes people don't just see it, but that's why I think this is so important. I really appreciate you all taking the time to do it once here.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move on to our last proclamation, which is proclaiming May 21st through 27th as National Emergency Medical Service Week. Whereas emergency medical services is a vital public service, and whereas the members of emergency medical service teams are ready to provide life-saving care to those in need 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And whereas access to quality emergency care dramatically improves the survival and recovery rate of those who experience sudden illness or injury. And whereas emergency medical services has grown to fill a gap by providing important out-of-hospital care, including preventative medicine, follow-up care, and access to telemedicine. And whereas the emergency medical services system consists of first responders, emergency medical technicians, paramedics, emergency medical dispatchers, firefighters, police officers, educators, administrators, pre-hospital nurses, emergency physicians, trained members of the public, and other out-of-hospital medical care providers. And whereas the members of emergency medical service teams, whether career or volunteer, engage in thousands of hours of specialized training and continuing education to enhance their life-saving skills. And whereas it is appropriate to recognize the value and the accomplishments of emergency medical service providers by designating Emergency Medical Services Week now. Therefore, I, Madison Davis, Mayor of the City of Brisbane, in recognition of this event, do hereby proclaim the week of May 21st through 27th, 2023 as Emergency Medical Services Week with the EMS Strong theme, EMS Week, where emergency care begins. I encourage the community to observe this week with appropriate programs, ceremonies, and activities. And Battalion Chief Matt Powers from North County Fire is here to accept the proclamation via Zoom.
All right, Mayor Davis and Honorable City Council, thank you so much. Our firefighters within the City of Brisbane and the whole North County Fire Authority do such a tremendous job with the quality of emergency medical care that they give our citizens, visitors, patients, etc. Even today, they did have a cardiac arrest that they were able to revive in accordance with the City of San Francisco. So just their training and sustaining life. So people can go back home to their families. We really applaud the council for recognizing our members for Emergency Medical Services Week and to continue the care that they give to our communities. So once again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Okay, that brings us to the consent calendar. We've removed item I. I would like to recuse from item H, as Recology is a member of the Brisbane Chamber of Commerce Board. So I'd like to entertain a motion of E through G and J.
I'll make a motion to approve item E, F, G, and J.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Cunningham,
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz,
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin,
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell,
Aye.
and Mayor Davis.
Aye. And I will now go ahead and step out of the room and turn it over to Mayor Pro Tem O'Connell, who will do item H.
Thank you. And item H is to approve receipt of and receive Recology of Brisbane's 2023 rate increase of 4.64%. Do we need a brief staff report since we pulled it from consent?
No, ma'am, it's a consent calendar item, so there's no staff report
Okay.
prepared.
Any?
I'm fine. I'll make a motion to approve item
Second.
H.
Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz.
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin.
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Aye.
Mayor Davis has been recused.
We'll ask Mayor Davis to return.
Okay. We will now move on to public hearing, item K. Consider adoption of a resolution to approve amendment of the 2023 through 2031 housing element and finding this action categorically exempt from environmental review under CEQA guidelines 15061B3. Staff report, please.
Yes, thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. You recall that earlier this year in February, the council certified and adopted the latest housing element update that was pending HCD approval. This followed about a year and a half of various public engagement and review processes, as well as a preliminary or first round of HCD review that happened last fall. As outlined, and that's more outlined in the staff report, following adoption of the element by the council this year, we did resubmit it to HCD. We received some additional minor technical comments that necessitate minor revisions to the element that are before you tonight. Again, both their comment letter and the proposed revisions are shown in the attachment of the staff report in red line strikeout. In general, the comments were relatively minor in nature. They wanted further detail regarding the development potential of sites to achieve the RENA during the planning period. They requested additional geographic targets and achievement metrics to certain policies within the document, which we've added. And they've added some requested technical revisions to regulations regarding group homes and infrastructure costs as they relate to a constraint to infill housing in Brisbane. So those revisions were made and are attached to the staff report. You received two pieces of correspondence. One was a letter from the Housing Action Coalition, which requested some additional timeframes and deadlines for adoption of the Bayland specific plan. Those deadlines that they've suggested are much more, they're not required by state law. We're committing to meet our obligations under state law, and that's what the element does. They also made some comments regarding CEQA compliance and the idea of peering off the previous EIR for the Baylands as a programmatic document. And we can certainly make some clarifications to that particular policy. My staff who's there tonight in person will read that into the record after this item. And then the other correspondence you should have received today is a letter from HCD, which does confirm that the housing element is modified, meets the statutory requirements of the housing element law. So that's very good news. I want to thank my staff who are present this evening for all their hard work on this effort. I also want to appreciate or acknowledge HCD staff for working with us over this last amendment and revision cycle to be very responsive to our comments and our concerns and to get back to us quickly to allow us to move forward this evening. With that, I'm going to have my staff who's present this evening read into the record the revision to the policy related to the CEQA, and then we would recommend the council adopt the element as modified. Thanks for your comment or your time.
Thank you. So the proposed revisions to the text would be on page 47 of section 3.1.1.
We can't hear you.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. The proposed revisions would be on page 47 of the element. It's section 3.1.1.1. The language revision would basically insert a new sentence to the discussion of schedule, our estimated schedule for processing the Baylands specific plan and EIR. The additional language states that the city will strive to expeditiously complete the final EIR for the Baylands project in a manner compliant with CEQA, including appropriate use of the final program EIR previously approved for the Baylands.
And with that, we'd recommend the council adopt the updated element. Take any questions you might have.
Council questions? Would anyone like to start?
No questions.
Okay.
Yeah, I just have a couple.
Okay.
So, yeah, John, I think that's great news. It was, I'm really glad that that staff and HCD were able to work together and, be honest about what our housing element is and what we would like to accomplish. On the, let's see, I guess it's attachment 1. There's this red line. It's on, I guess, page 79, and it's the schedule, for building housing on the Baylands, and so you guys give this timeline, which I know that was a requirement. We're looking at 2027 for the first 362 dwelling units, and then finishing the housing by 2031. But you also then below that, there could be some unforeseen issues beyond the city's control, and that the city is not in a position to guarantee the tentative schedule outlined above will be achieved. So, which totally makes sense, right? So, if there are issues beyond our control and the schedule gets a little delayed, what are the ramifications against the city if that occurs?
Well, basically, we don't really know. We've committed to reporting to HCD, and a lot of it is circumstantial. I'm sure if it's an issue where, it's perceived that the city is the roadblock to any particular entitlement or moving forward, that would be one circumstance. If it's another agency that's beyond our control, I would presume HCD would view it differently. All we've committed to is being very transparent as to where we are in the process, how things are moving forward. And, again, over the life of this housing element, the annual reviews will just have to, again, explain where we are in the process and why we're at whatever point we are. And if we slip, why we've slipped from what we might have aspired to or thought we might achieve. Okay.
So then it is really about communication, right, between us and HCD, keeping them abreast of the timeline and how things are developing.
Correct.
Okay. And then on page 82, and I know this isn't a redlined, segment, but I was just curious, in regards to affordability, and I know in that letter or the response from HCD that's in our packet, a lot of it addresses affordability. And so, so we have, for the Baylands, very low 145 units, low 82, and then moderate 287. But if the city, council chooses to be more aggressive in those, wanting more affordability out in the Baylands, we're not tied to these numbers. We could have a more aggressive, amount of affordable units out in the Baylands.
Right. These are
that was
targets.
negotiated.
And also it's important to realize that, again, for us to really put those targets in, they can only be targets because affordability can be tied to product type, rental, ownership, et cetera. That level of detail we don't have currently. So again, we had to do it just as a target. And again, if things change based on the product type or the council policy direction, we'll inform HCD of how we've modified those targets.
Okay. And then, so our current affordable housing ordinance, is that 15% affordability?
More or less. I think Julia's there. She probably,
because I saw something else.
Range.
So, okay.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. So the existing inclusionary requirement is kind of like a sliding scale, but it averages out to about 15%, especially for larger projects. What's different though is, like John was mentioning, if it's a rental project, the requirements are for very low and low income housing. If it's a for sale project, the requirements are for moderate and low income housing. So there are differences in the affordability levels based on the tenure.
Okay. All right. Cool. Thank you. And then just for clarification, it's on page 89, and it's in that red line paragraph where it talks about to amend the zoning ordinance to increase the maximum height to at least 36 feet in all districts, allowing multifamily residential uses. So basically, 3 stories. So I was a little confused. Can buildings be higher than that? Is that what, or is it just, is that the max?
So we actually have,
Go ahead.
okay. We actually have districts that allow multifamily development with higher heights.
Okay.
The PAOZ districts, as examples, allow up to 38 feet in height.
Mm-hmm.
We also have 35-foot height limits in the mixed-use districts and the NCR02, for example. So what HCD is, what we intended to address in that revision was that our districts essentially, so R2 and R3, which currently have 30-foot height limits, that we would consider those zoning amendments to increase the height in those districts. HCD, as part of our conversations, stuck a pretty hard line on that in terms of reasonable accommodations for 3-story development. That is the height that they were comfortable with and that we went with in our revisions.
HCD's perception was that our limits were a constraint to multifamily development, whether or not, again, we can have an argument about whether we believe that's true or not, but at some point, we're not increasing the number of stories. We're just increasing the allowable height. So we felt it was prudent to make that recommendation to achieve HCD certification of our element.
Okay, great. And then just one last question, and it's an attachment 4 in page 153. And it was referenced in other parts of the staff report too. Let's see, updated. Oh yeah, no, actually, not that particular reference, but you know what? I'm not exactly sure where I saw it, but there was comments about pipeline development as opposed to adopting the specific plan, and so that seemed to be a little bit of an issue between us and HCD. So how did that get resolved?
Well, HCD's concern was that in a lot of ways, as we know, Brisbane's unusual and that so much of our arena is in a single location under a single development site. And so they were looking for additional information regarding schedule, that if we were just kind of meeting a standard zoning requirement like we did with Parkside, that we would not have had to have done, but they put an extra burden of proof on us, or at least an informational requirement, again, based on how heavily we relied on the Baylands for the arena. So again, I think we got to this reasonable place where, we have targets and we have aspirational desires to move the project forward. And I think that's the messaging we want to send to HCD. We intend to move the project forward and process it in a diligent manner, but we can't commit to approving something prior to, going through the process. So that was kind of the balance we struck, but is to provide them some level of, they can demonstrate that Brisbane is moving forward this project, that they have intention to move forward with it. And that's, the balance we struck in this particular housing element.
Okay, so that balance has been struck then. Okay, great.
Yes.
Okay, so and then just that it's actually page 153. So yeah, so the last question and it goes back to affordability. So, so it says program 2.E.4 has now been edited to ensure that the requirement of 20% or more of the units be affordable, and that the ordinance update is scheduled to be completed by January 31st, 2024. So are we making some changes, and that'll be before the council sometime this year, or am I misinterpreting that?
I'll turn that one over to Julia, I believe is.
Sure. So we have not drafted such an ordinance to address that change yet. We anticipate it'll be coming before you shortly. Yeah, January 31st.
No, she's looking.
Yeah, January 31st of next year. And again, that's just for the PAOZ district.
Okay.
I don't know if as I was reading our response, I'm not sure if that was clear in the written response, but I want to say that now. It's just for the PAOZ
Yeah, no,
districts.
but thank you for clarifying, Julia. Okay, that's all the questions I have.
Madam Mayor, if I may. I just would like clarification, if I could, on something referenced in the letter from the Department of Housing and Community Development on page 148. On the top, they talk about on/offsite improvements. Could you please elaborate? Could you clarify what they're referencing?
Ken or Julia, if you mind taking that one.
I lost the place a little bit, but I think you're referring to the question that had to do with offsite improvements being an impediment to housing potentially, and so.
I just, from the paragraph, I wasn't sure what they were referencing. It says the element now indicates that off-site improvements can substantially increase costs for additions or smaller developments. What do they mean by off-site improvements? Are they talking about infrastructure?
Right, they're talking about infrastructure costs, but especially they were concerned about the road widening, and that came through the conversation we had with them. And so we took a closer look at the road widening costs and also clarified for them that we're not expecting the entire roadway to be improved to a new width, but it's just that frontage of the house in central Brisbane. Private roads are a different matter, but so we clarified that situation, and they were happy with that.
Okay, thank you.
John, I think this one's for you. Page 131, B20, I guess is on the right-hand side if you're looking for it as an identifier. The purple areas, central Brisbane sites identified for housing. Some of those sites are clearly already zoned for housing, but others are not. So what would be our next step relative to changing those zones? Do we have to change the zoning for that? And before you answer the question, I'll ask both questions because they're very similar. So that is an area that is currently, I believe, PAOZ-1 and PAOZ-2, as well as Lower Brisbane Acres and other areas. So how do we proceed now with some of these areas, specifically areas that are not zoned for residential? What's the process? Did I just make sense?
You did. You're at I'm a bit of a disadvantage because I don't have the pagination on the electronic version I'm looking at. So I might ask for some help from
Attachment 1,
staff.
Appendix B.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I can,
Yeah,
I think I can field this
Got it.
one. So
Okay, great.
the purple sites that you see are the smaller scattered sites are within the R1, R2, and R3 districts, and they're already zoned for those housing units. So there's no rezoning that would have to happen with those. And likewise, the larger swath of purple is the Brisbane Acres, which is also already zoned. So these are potential infill sites. No rezoning has to happen for those.
So Ken, looking at that map I'm looking at the right-hand side in our packet, it's page 131. On the far right-hand side, that's already zoned R1 and R2?
Sorry, the far right edge, I glossed over that on my image here. That is actually Southwest Bayshore, and it is zoned for residential as well, but it's not a R site. It's a mixed-use district.
Got it. And then page 132, the PAOZ1 and PAOZ2. How do we get those into residential zoning, whatever we call it? How do we change the zoning? I know the state said these things can happen. Am I referring to the correct item there? So how do we
Yes.
proceed, especially since we don't own any of these properties?
Well, this is really an inventory of sites we've identified.
Okay.
So this is not new activities. These are sites
Okay.
we've identified for housing. So, basically the Parkside plan is the vehicle or basis by which housing could be permitted there in the future. Again, there may be some need to revisit that in the future, but for our purposes, other than the minor policy adjustments that Julia mentioned about affordability, they understand the situation with the PAOZs and there's no other changes required at this juncture.
Okay, thank you. That was all.
Okay, so if there are no additional questions, I will now open the public hearing. And I will take comments from the public at this time. I know we have a hand raised on Zoom.
We have Ali Sapperman.
Hi, my name's Ali Saperman. I'm with the Housing Action Coalition. Thank you for reading my letter and my previous letter. I just want to thank the council. I think this housing element has made a ton of really great progress. I'm really happy to see a timeline for the Baylands site. But I just want to make a few really important clarifications. So the city has really decided to buckle down and make the site a priority for the housing element. I'm working on over 20 housing elements across multiple counties, and I haven't seen very many cities put 90% of their arena in one site. It's not necessarily a bad thing. However, if you're going to do it, you need to do it right. And without timely approval of the Baylands project, the city will not be able to comply with housing element law. Now, I know the city attorney spoke to earlier about the statute. However, it is really important that the city is doing everything in their power to make sure that this project moves forward and does things to prevent any delays. And so making clarifications about when the EIR will happen, where we could see some significant delays, would be really helpful, which I referenced in my letter. But additionally, making sure we don't move away from the program EIR. I know there was going to be a clarification for that. So I'd love to hear that. But those are some ways that the city can prevent itself from harms later on. And I know it was spoke to earlier that they were there's not clarity on what would happen if the city doesn't move forward with this project. It would open the city up to a lot of lawsuits. It would potentially make the city lose local control because all your eggs are in one basket here and you haven't created a buffer with other sites. If this site isn't developed within this RENA cycle, then you've basically not touched your RENA, and that could put the city in a really bad place. But you don't have to be in a bad place. It's a great site. The city has spent a lot of time with it, making sure it's great for the housing element. And so adding these additional protections would really help with the timeline, move this project forward, and make sure that the city stays compliant with this housing element. And it's something that I've talked with HCD and Paul really regularly in our meetings. So I just think these are really good protections for the city, and I'm looking forward for a really great certified element. Thank you.
Anyone else from the public wishing to speak at this time?
I see no more raised hands, Madam Mayor.
Okay, can I get a first and a second to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz.
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin.
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Aye.
And Mayor Davis.
Aye. Council discussion?
I've asked all my questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Madam Mayor, I'll start.
Okay.
I first would like to recognize all of our planning staff. I think that the amount of work that went into this, no one has any concept of how many hours. And yes, it's your job, but this is not easy. I also applaud the effort to meet with HCD and go over all these details. For the comment from the public about moving forward and not delaying, I don't think there's anyone on this council, I'm speaking from myself, but I would be hard pressed to find anyone on this council that's trying to delay anything. And I think we're showing a good faith effort. In terms of Brisbane, we have a lot of land area that actually has water on top of it. So looking at the land mass, 90% of the housing element on the Baylands actually makes a lot of sense because it's a large swath of land. It has a lot of opportunities to put some significant housing there. And I think that we recognize there's a need for low income and very low income. I know plenty of people in Brisbane who have relatives. They may be seniors. They're retired on a fixed income. They are low income. We have employees in Brisbane and people who work in Brisbane who don't make a lot of money and they travel far. So having low-income housing in Brisbane is important. We recognize that. So I want to thank all of our planning staff. This was really a heroic effort, and I know the number of hours you had to put into this. And John, you're the leader of that department. I really appreciate your leadership in this area and your tenacity to get the job done. Thank you very much.
Anyone else want to say something?
Yeah, I just want to echo what you said, Colleen, about our staff. They've done a fantastic job putting together this housing element. And you're right, it's no easy task. I mean, this thing is, several inches thick. And to put together a document like this takes a ton of hours, right? But also takes a lot of expertise and knowledge. Thank goodness you guys love this work. It shows in the final product. Putting together the housing element is a compromise, right? It's working back and forth with HCD to come up with something that we can be compliant with. And I feel that both sides have worked in good faith. And I feel like the product that we have today is better than the first one. And so, for myself personally, I'm excited about the housing opportunities for the Baylands. We have an opportunity to create some wonderful neighborhoods out there. As you said, Colleen, we want to create more affordable housing for not only for our folks, but, to be a responsible city in the region. There's that comment about, 90% of our arenas in the Baylands. And, I don't think there's any city out there that recently voted to double the size of their community.
Triple.
Right. Triple. Yeah. I don't know if it's triple. I think it's double, right? Because the amount of units that we have in Brisbane is a couple thousand, and this is a couple thousand. So, measure JJ is. So, thank you, to the work that you've done, and I'm good with moving forward with it.
I'd like to make a motion to adopt the resolution for the housing element.
I'll second.
Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Councilmember Lentz.
Aye.
Councilmember Mackin.
Aye.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Aye.
And Mayor Davis.
Aye.
Thank you, staff.
We'll now move on to old business. Item L, Sierra Point Open Space and Parks Planning and Marina and Sierra Point Sea Level Rise Resiliency. And we are going to receive an overview from One Shoreline. So we'll start with Len Matterman.
All right. Hello, council members, Madam Mayor. Good to see you in person. I saw you on Zoom. It was about 18 months ago, a little more, I think. So it's good to be here in person. So my name is Len Matterman. I run the San Mateo County Flood and Sea Level Rise Resiliency District, also known as One Shoreline. And you can advance the slide. So I'll go through these relatively quickly, and obviously if there are questions, I'd be glad to talk about that as well afterwards. So we'll start off with kind of some background. There have been many studies associated with the climate vulnerabilities of San Mateo County over the past about 10 years, dealing with issues related to transportation and housing and temperature and wildfire, and certainly in regards to atmospheric rivers and sea level rise. And on that last topic of sea level rise, we're the most vulnerable county in California. Here are some pictures from San Bruno on a rainy day in 2021, and on a sunny day. It's about a mile from San Francisco Bay, and there's water coming up on the streets during a king tide event. And then on the coast side, there had been a long-standing flood control district at the county since the late 1960s, but it only covered about 10% of our county land. And it was, you can advance the slide, it was considered insufficient to address the climate problem, in part because it's such a big issue for our county, and there was a general recognition that the cities or the county itself weren't adequately equipped to deal with it individually. That One Shoreline was created through legislation in 2019. You could advance the slide. And we were established starting in January 1, 2020. And we deal with too much water and too little water. Our legislation deals with flooding, sea level rise, stormwater, coastal erosion, and then on the other side, water supply. And so all of those are threats that certainly climate exacerbates. Next slide, please. So in the first few years, January of 2020 till December of 2022, we set up the agency, and it's a substantial effort. We also initiated some multi-jurisdictional projects, and I could talk about that. And we worked with the city of Burlingame to pass the first zoning ordinance in the Bay Area that has requirements for new developments related to sea level rise. And we completed a first construction project that was in planning for about 10 years before we were created, actually more than 10 years. And we were handed that in 2020, and it was completed the following year. It's about a $10 million project to reduce flooding and provide environmental benefits in Redwood City and Menlo Park and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service ponds. Our priorities going forward for the next couple of years relate to planning projects, storms, and the sustainability of this effort. San Mateo County has 53 miles of bay shoreline, and there are significant sections that are in planning or design or construction, and sections that are not yet, although many conversations are happening in those sections. And that includes Brisbane, and I'll talk about kind of what One Shoreline and the city of Brisbane can do together on these topics. One thing I wanted to point out on the sustainability of the effort piece is, and it was very interesting to hear the previous agenda item related to housing, and congratulations to all of you on getting that done. It is a big milestone. We work with a lot of cities, and I know how hard that is, and congratulations to your staff and to you. In terms of sustainability in the effort, one of the things that I'm particularly interested in is a general understanding that if you care about housing, or you care about transportation, or you care about utilities, or you care about the environment, all of these kinds of things are affected by climate. And we need to start as a society, and I'm determined in San Mateo County to start thinking about how we take action in those various sectors of society, and that we build resilience to all of that. So when we put housing in, let's make sure that housing is resilient. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Same with transportation, utilities, and all these other sectors of society. And don't segment them and say, oh, climate, that's an environmental issue. Climate is everything. And I really, it's one of my missions is to get that infused. And we work with community-based organizations, housing advocates, senior advocates, low income, homeless, and all of those types of programs, which is not maybe a traditional kind of thought of as a One Shoreline program, but work with them to appreciate and understand and incorporate climate vulnerability and resilience into their work. Next slide, please. So we have projects. There are many projects, and I'm not going to go through all of this. I'm just putting this up there to say there's a lot going on, and I would now essentially include the Baylands project as something that I look forward to working with the staff and you all on to make that part of an important resilience effort between the San Francisco County line and the city of and the Sierra Point area. And I think that it and working with Caltrans and other key players can be an important part of Brisbane's resilience strategy. Next slide. We do planning, and we've really entered the planning space in a big way recently. And the reason we've done that is, as you know, or may not know the statistic, but you know, in general terms, California as a state had the 3 driest years followed by the 3 wettest weeks on record in both cases. And what we saw in the last few months in terms of atmospheric rivers was really a mirror of what we had in 2021, where there were 2 atmospheric rivers in October and December, and those were about 3/4 of the whole year worth of rainfall. And we consider that the new normal. And there may be years that are not normal in the sense that they repeat the old patterns we had, but we're looking at a different regime right now. So that's just on the atmospheric river side. If we look at sea level rise, this graph that's on the screen shows that since 1895, the bay has risen. Its sea level rise is not new, and it's risen about 1 inch every 15.5 years. And under an intermediate range, intermediate scenario of sea level rise. So what that means is Antarctica and Greenland and all the ice sheets haven't completely melted, but they've melted some. It's kind of a middle of the road scenario that's put together by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It goes from 1 inch every 15.5 years to 1 inch in every 3.8 years. So a pretty dramatic rise over the next 27 years compared to what we've seen in the past. Next slide. So the core planning documents of local jurisdictions, you know them, general plans, specific plans, and zoning ordinances. They guide how we develop our communities, the values and priorities that we have. They don't yet account for climate change. And so what we're trying to do is change that dynamic. And if it doesn't change, then what we put in, we intend to last for decades, but it won't be thought through in a resilient way and be able to function for that long a term in too many cases. And there are many proposed developments along the bay, not just in Brisbane, but South City, of course, Burlingame, Redwood City, San Carlos, Belmont, East Palo Alto, most of the cities, Menlo Park, have along the bay have major developments proposed. So we came out with something called a planning guidance policy. Go to the next slide. Oh, actually, as part of the planning guidance policy, we took a look at the current land uses of cities. On the screen you see here Burlingame and East Palo Alto, which are 2 good examples of differences that our cities have. Burlingame, it's really all commercial and industrial in the area affected by sea level rise. In East Palo Alto, it will have substantial commercial along Bay Road there, but mostly it's residential. We also looked at housing and the RHNA numbers that are proposed by cities. And we compared those RHNA numbers both in terms of all housing, but also in terms of affordable housing to where the floodplain exists and where the future floodplain exists. And the numbers are pretty telling. About 43% of proposed units and 38% of affordable proposed units are in the floodplain. And it doesn't mean they can't be put there. It just means we have to think about what we're doing with those units when we put them there and building resilience into those projects. Next slide. So we developed this planning guidance policy. It started in 2021 when Burlingame asked for help on creating a chapter. We reached out to jurisdictions around the country, mostly on the East Coast and also in Hawaii, and developed the zoning ordinance for Burlingame. That was followed in 2022 and beginning of this year with general plan updates along the same lines in South San Francisco and a zoning ordinance in South City, as well as general plan updates in San Mateo and San Carlos. And that led to our planning guidance policy. People can find that at oneshoreline.org/planning-guidance. Next slide. What is it? It's a standardized evolving resource for jurisdictions to put language into their specific plans, general plans, zoning ordinances, and to incorporate into how they review developments. It's also intended to be for the public so that they can be aware of these issues and help to weigh in on development decisions that are made by the county or the cities along the Bay. And we hope it serves as a model for other areas of the Bay Area. And there's a lot of interest in it right now because this is really the only one of its kind in the Bay Area at this point. It's voluntary. Every city is different, has different interests and environments and personalities, et cetera, and they'll interpret it differently and implement it differently. But if we felt it was important and consistent with our mission to at least put something out there so that the cities can be as aligned as possible as they think through these decisions. It's on new private development. It doesn't deal with residential housing. It doesn't deal with existing development. We are looking at putting out a similar document, kind of a complementary document about capital planning by public agencies next year. Next slide, please. Quick thing on the table. Oh, go back. Table of contents. So first of all, it's about what the document is and what is our Bay Protection Standard, which is the FEMA 100-year tide plus 6 feet. That's the standard that we've set. Next, you can advance. It goes through One Shoreline's role in development review and technical assistance. We talk to a lot of developers constantly that are looking at Bayside's developments and talk to them about building resilience into their site and how their site plan fits into their neighbors and their community, where private developments are part of the solution. And I'm sure that in the Baylands project, that's going to be the case. Next, and then template language for general plans, as well as template language for zoning ordinances. You can advance it. And that includes buffer zones away from water, building or shoreline protection infrastructure, or moving back and giving the land rights to the city to build it, or One Shoreline to build it. Stormwater capture, groundwater rise, all kinds of issues, templates for zoning language. And then again, in terms of development reviews, kind of specific items to present to developers as part of the approval process. Next slide. We're looking here at a part of the planning guidance policy, which is what we call the map of future conditions. And it's an interactive map. And we're looking now at the city of Brisbane. If you advance the slide one time, you'll see that I'll highlight the green line, which is the standard for shoreline protection. And that would be along Highway 101 in this case. The yellow area is the sea level rise overlay district. So this is an area, and this goes all the way down the shoreline to East Palo Alto border, that illustrates the areas impacted by sea level rise and specific relevant zoning requirements. And then the last one, which I think actually would be pretty important for Brisbane, is the shallow groundwater overlay district. And I think a lot of the areas of the Baylands and other sites are affected by groundwater, and that rises when the seas rise. And it's an area of understanding and concern that's evolving. There are new reports coming out every year, which really move forward our understanding of how it's going to affect the Bay Area. And what we tried to incorporate with this was the most advanced information that's come out with from an SFEI report and using USGS maps. But it is something that will be evolving as time goes on, our understanding of it. Next slide. In order to implement these things, it's really about reviewing the document and thinking about the local context, community outreach, all the kinds of things that go into general plan updates, specific plan updates, and zoning ordinances, receiving feedback from you all, as well as the public, and adopting policies. If there's an imminent update coming up, then it's a great time to take advantage of that. If there's not one, then we encourage cities to think of these issues in terms of making a special case, let's say, to update a zoning ordinance or a specific plan. What we do is what I'm doing today, which is talking with city councils and staffs. Go ahead, you can advance. And looking at providing data, technical data regarding vulnerabilities. We've had over the last 3 years, Stanford PhD students working on our behalf on various topics. The most recent one is working on groundwater for us. So I think we are developing a kind of a library of good technical data and try to make it into a useful form like these interactive maps. And the next steps for this planning guidance policy, actually tomorrow our public comment period closes. On Monday, we'll talk about it at a board meeting again, which we've been doing since June of last year. And then we hope to bring it to the board for approval in July, the June meeting this year, which is June 26th. Next slide. And so my final slide is potential areas to work together with Brisbane. So one is on the private development and public infrastructure projects to ensure long-term resilience. And we've started that conversation. I sat down with your senior staff not too long ago, started talking about that. Another one is working with the city of San Francisco on the north and the city of South San Francisco on the south to ensure that as much as possible, the connections about shoreline resilience are aligned between these jurisdictions. I think we can be of value in that. And then finally, in regards to Highway 101, Caltrans, we work with Caltrans at a senior level at District 4. And most recently, we've been working with them very closely about the storm and the effects near Highway 101 and El Camino Real in terms of flooding and the role that we have as local agencies and Caltrans has as a state agency with those two key assets to work together to kind of make sure our creeks can flow adequately during these major storms, and therefore the storm drains can flow into the creeks adequately. So working with Caltrans, I think that's the final one I would put out there, but we're open to other ideas. And I think that is the last slide. Should be, yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Great. We'll go ahead and open it up for council questions. I'd like to start. Can you give us more insight on like the last part where you talked about long-term resilience of 101, because that obviously is incredibly impactful for us here in Brisbane. And I know that I think we all share this concern that that is going to be viable in the future. And like, do you have more insight into what's being done to ensure that 101 can be maintained through sea level rise? Or is that just, are we giving up on 101? I'd love to know. Love to know more.
I can't speak for Caltrans, which is a good thing. And there are conversations that are being scheduled right now with Caltrans and Brisbane staff and myself. And so, I guess what I would say is that Caltrans, in all of my interactions with Caltrans about Highway 101, and this dates back over 10 years before One Shoreline was created and I was in a different role down in the southern part of the county. All of my interactions, they recognize the absolute criticality of 101. And the idea of abandoning 101 seems like it's probably, it would be very surprising if that were to be the case. And I don't think that's the case.
Good.
The question is then, okay, what do you do? And I think Caltrans has options. They're looking at all kinds of options down in the southern part of the county, and not just at 101, but Highway 84, which turns into the Dumbarton Bridge, and there are options there because that bridge is going to be obsolete in about 15 years. And so there's just a lot going on in the space. One of the first, actually probably the first substantive slide I showed had a report from December of 2020 done by Caltrans District 4 about their climate vulnerability, and it highlighted many areas of 80% of Highway 101 is at risk from sea level rise. The section here alongside Brisbane was red in that image, and you probably noticed that. And so, I just look forward to those conversations. In terms of In terms of what specific treatment to protect the highway, there are many things that can be done. We just have to together kind of approach Caltrans and get some of the answers.
Ma'am, I wonder if I might supplement that response for you, just because I was going to cover it in my staff report. It just might be convenient to do it now. So a couple of weeks ago, our staff did reach out and we were in touch with Caltrans District 4, which is the local district staff who are responsible for responding to sea level rise. And it was just convenient that last week they had a schedule meeting with Assemblymember Pappin's office. So we were invited to that. The city manager went. I wasn't available at the time, and my deputy public works director also went. And we were given a copy of their initial draft of the sea level rise response. And what they did in there was they went through and they came up with a categorization or prioritization, and they inventoried throughout District 4 their small culverts, their large culverts, their bridges, their roadways. And as a result of that, they came up with priorities of which ones they're going to protect. And US 101, the reach through City of Brisbane, was identified as a #1 priority. And of course, there's many other projects in there. So that study, as Lynn clearly noted, doesn't yet decide how they're going to deal with it. But I find it somewhat reassuring that they've at least identified it as a #1 priority. So, because that's very important to us. It was like, I go into my staff report later, we have to have some paradigm of what's going to happen out there, right? I mean, if Caltrans had said, hey, we're just going to give that up, good luck, guys, go with God, we would have a very different response that we'd be looking at. So hopefully that's helpful.
It is, thank you. That concludes my questions. So I will open it up to my council colleagues. Does anyone want to, okay, Councilmember Mackin?
Len, thank you very much for taking the time to come talk to us tonight. I've talked to other council members throughout the county, and you hear an interesting mixed bag of reports on how if they have a shoreline, because not every city has that, how they're dealing with it. And I just wanted a little reflection from you. Seems like when we talk about sea level rise, the common reaction is, oh, we need federal and state funds. And then I've also heard that some cities, they've actually had private property owners along the shore say, we know the city can't do this for us. We know the state funds may not come, the federal funds may not come. We're going to try to pay for it. And then I've also heard of some cities going, well, and let's take Foster City as an example. We need to get the money from our citizens because we've got to redo all these levies. Can you just talk a little bit about the finances in terms of approaching this? I'm not asking you for the silver bullet answer, but what is the trend that's going on? Because we've kind of come upon climate change and sea level rise while we were dealing with a pandemic, and no one's minds were on this until we got to this past winter and we saw flooding. And the flooding also brought the groundwater intrusion, which is unlike things we had seen in the past. So it's brought that conceptual realization way closer to home for everyone. So could you just, any kind of comments you can bring to enlighten us on how are different cities approaching this in terms of the financial aspects?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Well, as you identified, they're approaching it in very different ways, or at least they have. Foster City did pass a ballot measure that funded the building of a wall and a levee integrated into that wall to get their properties out of the flood zone. And the way that was sold to the population was you're going to have to pay flood insurance and pay a much smaller amount through this ballot measure and avoid paying flood insurance. The concern is with sea level rise, FEMA redid their maps twice in the last decade. They certainly could do that again, and that would be a concern if you don't take a long-term resilience strategy. Other communities are looking at the private sector. I would say what we've been trying to do, and I think Burlingame and Redwood Shores are good examples of this. Right now, what we've been trying to do is work with the major developers to that in Burlingame, there are at least half a dozen developments that are there's more than that's approved but not built. I'm just talking about the ones that are in the approval process. Major developments on the bay. we're working with the developers to try to have their site not just planned for, let's say, a shoreline levee system, but to actually build it, and to build it to the standard of FEMA certification. It's a very complicated ask, not just because of the financing that developers worry about. It's also complicated because we then want to integrate what they do on their site, as large as it is. And one of the developments is over a kilometer of bay frontage. So these are big developments. We want to integrate what they do into a shoreline protection system for the whole community. And that gets really complicated fast if a developer is on one timeline and the rest of it's on another timeline. So we're working through that, and we're finding that same conversation in Redwood Shores with a large development called Redwood Life, which is also biotechnology in the Redwood Shores area, and looking at the same levee system on their property. So and this is, I think, good news that these conversations are starting to happen, that the cities are behind those conversations, supportive of those conversations. It's just really complicated between the city, which has the approval process, rather than one shoreline that's being asked to come in behind that and tie these properties together in a consistent, aligned approach for resilience, and the individual developers. I personally think that it's going to be a heavy lift for our community to secure the sufficient state funding, sufficient federal funding to address this problem. Is that it's going to take a combination of different pots of money, including those, hopefully. But if we can't wait around and assume that that's going to happen. And so we also need to look at the private sector and potentially some sort of assessment district. I mean, there are mitigation fees for all kinds of impacts that developments have. And there's no reason that, even though historically it hasn't been the case, there's no reason that climate shouldn't be included on that list, along with other items that are high priorities. So it's a long-winded answer, partly because it's so complicated, and I believe that it's going to be quite a diverse pot that's put together to actually make this happen.
And a final segue to that question, what hits home financially with property owners is insurance. Mm-hmm. And what areas never were on flood maps, they may now be on flood maps, or in your guidelines where you show the areas that are the dark yellow groundwater intrusion. Are those appearing on insurers' maps when they examine the coverage? Are we going to see changes within the insurance industry in our county because of this, to where that in itself may be what is the supreme motivator that we need to do something about this, because it's going to be costly if you can't get insurance, or if you don't take the flood insurance on the chance that you think, oh, it'll never happen.
Yeah, insurance, I'm learning a lot about that. Insurance is a big part of this issue, not just kind of on the negative punitive side, but it also can be a driver of good decision making. And it's both in the wildfire space and in the flood space that this is occurring. There is I mentioned that we have Stanford PhDs that help us out. One of them last year worked on the insurance question and looked at, they overlaid the areas in the county that require flood insurance, and they put on top of that the low-income areas, and on top of that, they put in the average cost per census tract of that insurance, and just took a look at is the way that the costs for insurance in this county only being distributed fairly? And not surprisingly, the answer is no. And partly as a result of that work, there's a bill in the legislature this year. It was introduced on Valentine's Day, I think, by Luz Rivas, who's an assemblywoman from Southern California. And in that bill, it was sponsored by the California Department of Insurance. And there are 6 pilot projects in that bill of agencies to create pilot projects around community-based insurance as an alternative to the federal flood insurance program, potentially. And 3 of them are jurisdictions, cities in Southern California. One's a Native American tribe in Southern California. One is a county, Sacramento County. And the 6th entity is One Shoreline to create this pilot. And so we're hoping that legislation passes and the Department of Insurance, State Department of Insurance works with us to identify a community or communities where we can start to move the needle on this key insurance question. So thank you for that question. A lot of people don't think about insurance, but it's really important. Yeah. Any other questions?
Real quick. So the gorilla, the elephant in the room for us, if we're thinking about doing anything out at Sierra Point, is Lagoon Way, going out there. I just pulled up a picture and it is dated February 21 of this year of me driving along Lagoon Way out to Sierra Point with the waves lapping over the road. And so, gee, do we put a lovely park out at Sierra Point and then we've got no way to get there? I mean, how do we approach this animal at this point when that water is already going over the only way in and out of Sierra Point for us? They're the questions that we all go, what next? So what's your suggestion?
Layden, you want to let me take that?
Yeah, I was going
to. Let me take that as an engineer, because I see the council is very neatly transitioning and segueing into my staff report. So
Yes.
I'll get
Take it away, Randy.
Thank you, Len.
So, ma'am, honestly, from a design perspective, it's not that difficult to deal with that, because there are two entry points of water into the lagoon. One is from the reinforced concrete rectangular pipe sections that go from the lagoon to the bay, and one is from our storm drain pipes that dump into the lagoon. So if you can control those two, you can control the levels of water in the lagoon and the amount of water that then goes on the Sierra Point Parkway. So I imagine that there's an evolutionary staging of things you can do. You can create, much like they do in other countries, where you have floodgates on our side of the connection to the bay that at a certain sea level, and this is assuming a sea level that's going up and down, you decide, okay, we're not going to take any more water from the bay into there, okay? Now, at some point in time, you might have to decide that that's going to be a permanent closure. And when you decide that's going to be a permanent closure, you are going to have to decide, how are we going to circulate water into the lagoon, right? Because if you don't circulate water into the lagoon, it's going to very quickly eutrophy. It'll go through the process where green things will grow in it because there's a little bit of water, and then they'll die. It's the same process how something like Tuolumne Meadows out at Yosemite was created, but you can create a circulation. Now, on the other side, the water we put in there, the thing you've got to do, where we have to do our engineering magic, is we decide, okay, in an interim time period where we know sea level rise is going to be temporarily at this height because of a storm, but then it'll go back down and we can open the lagoon. We've got to decide, what are we going to do with the water that comes down through our storm drain system and dumps into the lagoon, which really is just a giant sedimentation pond, a detention basin, if you will. Where are we going to put that if it's not capable of exiting out to San Francisco Bay? So you have some certain decisions. You can decide, for instance, to not let the level of the lagoon go high enough to take away your capacity for all the water from town to go in there and temporarily be there. You can impound it in the lagoon as it's been impounded since the early 60s when US 101 and that lagoon were subsequently built. Or you can decide, we'll impound it somewhere else. So you create a pump station at the primary outfall and a piping, and you move it over to another impoundment area. And we see examples of that on a much smaller scale all across the country, where you decide that, okay, we're going to take a soccer field and we're going to build it here, and we're going to design it so when we have an excessive amount of water, it floods for a foot or two, and we take it there. There are parking lots in San Mateo County that are designed that way, that you've seen them. I'm blanking on which city it is, but if you go further down south, there are cities where you'll say, hey, this will be flooded to 6 inches during heavy rains, and they do that intentionally, and then it goes away. And the third thing you, of course, could decide to do is you could say, well, when it gets to the point where the sea level rise is going to be so high, we don't have any capacity in the lagoon anymore to do it, and we don't really want to impound it somewhere else, that pump station would then have to be designed to take it under US 101 and pump it directly into the bay. Because the amount of water that we're going to take from central Brisbane, it's a significant amount of water. If we were allowed to back up, it would look much like what happened to us on New Year's Eve storm. But to dump it into the bay, that giant receiving in there, it's not going to add enough water to that to impact it anywhere. So that's where my brain is going. Now that sounds simple when I talk to you like that about it. it's a difficult evolution to get the hydrologists and the hydraulic engineers and to get the permitting done. But I think we've got time. I think we can do that. And I'm glad we're thinking about it.
Sounds very, very expensive.
It is not inexpensive. I will agree with you there.
Nothing is these days. Is that the conclusion of your?
Yeah, I do have some
That's
questions
just an
for Len,
answer.
though, if-
Oh, you have a question?
Yeah. So
Okay.
if, and Kate, Tara, do you have any questions for Len? All right, Len, yeah, if you wouldn't mind coming back up. Yeah, nice meeting you in person. Thank you for the work that you do and the One Shoreline Committee. So, just kind of piggybacking on what Colleen was talking about in regards to, funding. And so, so there's the Infrastructure Act, there's the Inflation Reduction Act. We're currently in the process of creating a master plan. Are you familiar, how those types of acts are providing funding for things like sea level rise, resiliency, and if you could share that.
Yeah. I would say the state is probably more, there's more money coming out of the state right now for these kinds of topics than there is from the federal government. There is a program that is run by FEMA called the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities BRIC program, and that has a lot of money associated with it. And when Shoreline has, FEMA's indicated, we've applied for a couple of those, and FEMA's indicated that those applications are successful. City of Menlo Park applied for this FEMA money for a project, a shoreline levee project, same thing that I've been talking about, and the the FEMA award. They haven't seen the money yet, but the FEMA award is $50 million, so it's real money. And so I think of that pot of money going forward as probably on the federal side the most likely suspect.
Okay. All right. Good. No, that's good to know. I mean, you got to get in line somewhere, right?
Absolutely.
I want to touch upon the shoreline system, right? So, currently, our master plan is looking at just an area in front of, or on the eastern shore of Sierra Point, and a little bit on the south, a little bit on the north. But we're not really looking at the entire peninsula. And I don't know, I just want to get your thoughts on that. Is that something that maybe we should, explore, or does it matter?
Well, I guess I wouldn't say it doesn't matter, but I would say the important questions, you have Sierra Point, you have Highway 101 and Baylands, you have South City just below that, and San Francisco just above that. I would say that's the system to worry about, is from Candlestick Point approximately to South San Francisco, Oyster Point area. And we can help you do that because we're working with South City quite a bit. And I think as a countywide state chartered agency, we may be able to be helpful, I would hope, in the conversations with the city and county of San Francisco. So I don't, the only aspect of this peninsula-wide look that I would encourage Brisbane to take a look at are some of the things in the introduction to our planning guidance policy, which says kind of, here's what we recommend in terms of the level of protection, the different treatments of protection, how if you build something, if you build one type of treatment versus another one, here are some potential impacts that might reduce the amount of protection or reduce the longevity of what you put in, these kinds of things. So I think as a community of 12 Bayside cities within the county, there's a lot of expertise there. There's a lot of history. And what we're trying to do is bring that together, and Brisbane can certainly benefit from that. In terms of very specifically, should you be aligning with, what another city is other than South City or San Francisco? I would say probably not to worry about that so much.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you're right, one of your slides to talk about that collaboration between South San Francisco to the south and San Francisco to the north. That's a much larger footprint than what we're, focused on here. But, I appreciate, your willingness to help cities, right? Obviously, right? That's why it was formed.
Totally.
Would you be willing to, once we, get our master plan together, to be able to provide some comments,
Of course,
to it?
absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that I would hope that your staff and me and my staff are in communication about these things going forward. And because I've this feeling, at least what's been indicated to me, that there's a lot of energy and important decisions to be made over the next year or so. And as much as we can add value to your deliberation of those things, we want to do that. So absolutely.
All right, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Okay. I have a request for a 5-minute break, but I want to try to wrap up this section with you. So does anyone have something quickly?
Sure.
Is your mic on?
Sorry. Again, looking at your guidelines, we can see those yellow areas, which are sea level rise, and obviously Highway 101. But the other thing that is covered by water is Caltrain. Have you spoken to them? Because all along our lagoon and going south, it's all covered by water, according to your map. Have you had any outreach to them or any feedback?
We have talked with Caltrain, and Caltrain is the boundary of a lot of our sea level related work from the Bay to Caltrain. And of course, that changes quite a bit from Brisbane to East Palo Alto. But that is generally speaking, the limits of the area we're concerned about. So yes, we have talked with Caltrain. Caltrain is a player not just on the sea level rise question, but also on the backing up of storm drain question. And there's a lot of culverts under the Caltrain tracks too that impact communities up and down the peninsula. So the answer is yes. We've supported Caltrain in their requests for state money to do sea level rise related planning as a partner to Caltrain. And so yes, they are an important player. Again, that's, as much as our conversations together on Brisbane's interests related to Caltrain are concerned, we can hopefully be helpful in that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course.
Mayor, I was wondering if you would just entertain giving me just a few more moments, and then I think we can wrap up the sea level rise piece of this. Then when you come back, you'll
Sure.
transition over to Parks and Rec master planning. So the only item from my staff report about sea level rise that hasn't been elegantly interspersed with Len's comments based on the council's inquiries is just an update on where we were. So the study that we had talked about doing specific to the marina, so from the back of the marina, restrooms all the way eastward to the seawall, we did receive a joint venture proposal from a coastal engineering firm and from a civil engineering firm to study all of those components, including what we described earlier respectfully as the unsexy underground utilities. And we've taken that proposal and we sent it to State Coastal Conservancy, and we're waiting hopefully to receive a positive response on an application. And when we do, we'll start that work and we'll move it forward. And that's the end of my report.
Thank you. So you're saying that concludes section 2 of item L?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So we will take a brief 5-minute break, returning at 9:15.
Madam Mayor, we're ready whenever you are.
Okay, excellent. So now we will move on to section 3, Sierra Point Open Space and Parks Master Plan next steps. And I will turn it over to Noreen Leak for the staff report.
Thank you. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. The last time we brought this item before you, the consultant CMG provided a full presentation outlining the process to date, so I'm not going into that level of detail tonight. But following that meeting, the council subcommittee met to discuss next steps and to further outline a more extensive public participation plan. As a potential next step, the council subcommittee discussed a city council workshop, a working session, so to speak, to be held in the council chambers that would solicit community input on Sierra Point Park open space and sea level rise planning. Following that potential workshop, the city council may provide direction regarding subsequent master planning steps, which could include an on-site public workshop at Sierra Point as a public event, a proactive conversation with adjacent property owners, a Marina Sierra Point Yacht Club focus group, and expanded outreach to the broader Brisbane community. All of this would potentially lead to final recommendations that would be reviewed by the expanded Sierra Point subcommittee, consisting of 2 council members and representatives from the council's commissions and committees. After this review, the city council would consider a plan for adoption. So at this time, what we're hoping for this evening is to receive some guidance from the full council regarding the preferred next steps in the park planning process.
Does anyone have council, or does any of the members of the council have questions?
I do.
Okay, we'll start with you.
So on the first page of the staff report, it talks about additional funding will come from a park development impact fee that the city council will review soon. And I sort of take exception with that because it says it will come from a park fee, which we haven't decided to have. So it may be that it may come. And personally, I think if we have impact fees from development, that my recommendation would be more for a fee that goes to the general fund so we can use it where needed, and that parks might not be the number one need of the city. So it sort of is a misnomer that that's going to happen and that's where funding's going to take place. Excuse me. And then you attached a budget for the detailed RFP that we had done and what the consultant has spent so far. Am I seeing that we're $40,000 over budget so far?
The consultant provided this based on previous conversations with the council subcommittee regarding expanded engagement and public participation. So what you'll see highlighted in the yellow are additional items that were proposed in previous conversations but weren't part of the initial scope of the RFP for public engagement. So if we are to proceed with expanded outreach during this phase, then that would result in an additional cost. And those are identified with that excess number of $37,000 if all of them were to be pursued.
So is that something that you're not asking for a recommendation from the council at this point for
Correct.
An additional 40,000?
Correct.
So we've, at this point, has the contractor gone over budget?
They are currently at their budget for public engagement during this phase of the process. They have not exceeded their full amount because they haven't initiated the task 3 resolution phase.
Okay. Okay, I'll wait to get when we get into discussion after any other questions have been asked. Thank you.
Councilmember Mackin.
Thank you. Could I get clarification on the park development impact fee? So that's money collected for a new development that is to fund construction of, but not maintenance of parks.
It's acquisition, construction, and can be maintenance of existing
Ongoing
facilities.
maintenance?
No, an example would be like a renovation at Mission Blue. It
Okay.
could be a maintenance item for an existing recreational facility or amenity.
Okay, because I would echo just one concern that it's really nice to have parks, but once we have them, we have to maintain them and that takes money. And I don't know where that's going to come from. So that's okay. And let me see, I think I had one more question. No, I think I'll hold this one. Thank you.
Councilmember Lentz?
s- Hey, Noreen.
Hi.
Just to get clarification on the impact fee. So it's a park and rec impact fee, correct?
Is a park development impact fee
okay.
for rec facilities, parks, trails, and open space.
Got it. And then that money could be used throughout town. Doesn't have to be
Correct.
just for Sierra Point.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, good. But you can't use, you just can't throw it into the general fund, though. It has to be for these particular items that is designated for park and.
If the council so chose to adopt those development impact fees, yes.
Okay.
Respond to that, just because you obviously are having a conversation about it. I think the question I heard from Terry is really whether or not the city could have a general use impact fee as opposed to a impact fee on that's focused on roads or parks or things of that nature. So that's an interesting question. We sort of did that at the Northeast Ridge. We didn't really call it an impact fee. It was a little bit different situation. But I would like to take that back and talk to the attorneys and see what flexibility you have in that area. So I'm seeing some nodding heads that you'd at least like to have that as something that you could consider in lieu of specific impact fees in a subject area. Because we're looking at two of them right now. Parks development is one of them, and the second one is related to traffic demand. So, you may want to do that one and not the parks, and do a general one. I don't know. But let me, before we bring the parks development fee to you, so we're going to switch gears, I think, a little bit here, because we were planning on doing that in June. We'll talk with the attorneys and get a read for you on whether or not you could make that a more general fee.
I know that when Councilmember Mackin was mayor, she tried to get some information on how other cities raise funds from development and or businesses and business license fees and, many different things. And so I think it's good to know what we're putting an impact fee on and what we can do. And I would appreciate coming back from the attorneys with that. I know there's so many needs in our city, and while recreation is important, I think that infrastructure and transportation and housing and a lot of other things are important too. And so I would hate to just have impact fees that address a particular thing where we're already pretty heavy in our budget on our parks and rec, and probably percentage-wise much higher than most cities, percentage budget-wise. And so I would want to make sure that we're giving the city the most flexibility when it comes to any kind of impact fees from development or business licenses or any of those kind of things, that we're getting the most flexibility that we can so that we can meet current demands.
Okay. The only other thing, just so, kind of understand the playing field, we do have a major impact fee that we've been charging for years, and that's in your utility funds, your water and sewer connections. So we've been doing that for as long as I've been here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the public art ordinance is.
Yeah, it's not really an impact fee. It functions a little bit different.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
But it's ultimately money that comes from development. So in that sense, it's
Off the
similar.
top, yeah. Okay, all right. Splitting those hairs, right? So, and then of course, we've been talking about the nexus fees for affordable housing, right? So that's.
Yeah, and I would consider that an impact fee.
That would be an impact. Okay,
Yeah.
so that one makes.
Yeah.
The,
Next
for
fees.
affordable housing for the impact fees.
Affordable housing.
Right, so, Noreen, so the additional outreach, if we were to fund those items that are listed, CMG says, okay, it's gonna be an additional 37,000. So the money that, the original scope of work was 199,000. And where did that money come from in, in our funding buckets?
It came from a specialty fund. There were various deposits that were made with regards to existing developments out at Sierra Point. So it was a fund that was earmarked for park, Clay can correct me if I'm wrong, but park development out at Sierra Point.
Okay. So then, just to be clear, no money came from the general fund to do this?
Correct.
And then if we were to move forward with these additional public outreach tasks, it would come from that same fund, no general fund money?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Okay. Councilmember Cunningham?
I'm good.
Okay. Is there any member of the public wishing to speak on this item?
Well, you know better than to allow a former elected official to get up and talk.
It's okay.
We always appreciate former elected officials talking.
You're welcome if you wish. So, Noreen, we're just getting an update, or you're looking for some direction?
We're looking for direction from council on next steps. The recommendation that came out of the council subcommittee as a follow-up to the March meeting with the full council was to proceed with an in-person event that would be open to the public, where the council could have a working session
Right.
regarding
The
park
U-shaped
planning.
workshop?
Yep.
Yes.
So if I may, I think that having a discussion where we're all at the table and as much of the public wants to be at the table is a really good idea.
Yeah.
So much of the discussion was ideas that were thrown out for the portion that I was on the subcommittee, were ideas that were thrown out that were taken in with no feedback given from the consultant. And then they made these 3 plans where the public was outraged that it had gone that far without anyone's approval, so to speak, and that it looked like they were all approved already. And it got all the communities up in arms about it. And so, at least for my part, when I was discussing it with the consultants, they just were asking for general opinions, but there was no back and forth on feasibility. And I don't know what happened behind the scenes with staff, or how they came up with some of their plans, which now I think have completely changed, because what we heard, in other discussions were that some of the things were off the table. So, I think that having a really robust back and forth where people are able to get feedback from what the consultant thinks is feasible. Granted, it's not going to be that everybody gets their wish or, any of that. But I think that, the concerns will be more digestible if we have that kind of open forum. I don't know how valuable setting up impromptu ad hocs, in front of the library or at the park, because you just only get a very small cross-section of people that come to that. And, when I was at the community park and they had the pop-up, I saw maybe 2 or 3 people talk with the consultants. I probably spent more time there than most anyone. And still, it was just bullet points. They were just ticking a box that someone said, oh, I like this, I like that, but no sense of reality of what ticking that box would mean on the ground or on the paper. So, I think that having that kind of meeting is certainly more valuable use of consultant time than having little pop-ups everywhere where you just get small smatterings of input and no back and forth.
Madam Mayor, if I may. One of the things that has been problematic to date has been some feedback from part of the community saying that 3 plans were put on the table and it was, what do you like about them? And what if I say I don't like any of them? And there was no opportunity to say, I have other ideas. And I understand there are some members of the community have some very different ideas, including scaling down, some using the same amount of area. And this would be an opportunity for those people also to just come forward and start working on their plans. And I would also just want to relate that CMG was asked if the community came forward with ideas that were different from what they presented, could they then take that or incorporate and do those renderings for a final presentation? And they said yes. So yes, everything they do will cost us more money, but they also are amenable to, if some things change, that they can also work with that. And one last thing is, I would also say, there's a lot of outreach possibilities. I think I'm more conservative here. I'd like to see this one workshop, see how it goes. Yeah. If there's not an enormous turnout or interest, and for that workshop, we could invite people who, the boaters, the yacht club members, people who work at Sierra Point, make this broadcast to a wide segment, residents, see if they show up and there really is the interest before we go planning all these other presentations that may not be necessary.
Well, I was going to say exactly that. And also, we're going to get really valuable insight. I think from that workshop, we can better prepare what the next step is. What's the most appropriate thing based on what we've received? We may, direct the consultant to come back with a few more renderings or one rendering based on certain feedback that we received, or we may need to continue to synthesize that and chunk it out with more elements, engage certain elements versus like one whole plan at a time. So I would be in favor of scheduling a workshop. I think that's the best course of action at this time.
Madam Mayor, can I add something to that too?
Yeah.
Just thinking about what you have all said, the feedback that I've gotten from the people who have spoken to me, and a lot of the people who've spoken to me are people who actually use the marina a lot. I use the marina every single day. And the feedback that I have consistently gotten from people who use the marina is the reason they like being out there is because the beauty of the place is the place itself, not the whiz-bang things that people might want to put there, not a beach that can't be accessed because it's windy and cold 9-10 months of the year, but the natural beauty of the place. Looking across the bay, looking north to the city, looking back to the mountain. The peace and tranquility of the place was never in those renderings, not one piece of it. So that was major feedback that I got that I think we will elicit from the general public if we have this general public conversation rather than consultants designing hills and strange things that we've never seen before.
I'd like to get a sense from council whether, well, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
So, I agree with all of you that soliciting greater public input is necessary. We did receive a lot of feedback. So, I think we need to acknowledge that, right? And there is a lot of excitement from a certain segment of our population that would like to see something new out at Sierra Point. And there was a lot of feedback that we got from voters saying, hey, our voice needs to be heard. We're out here more than anybody else. Our concerns need to be really addressed inside whatever plan you decide to do. And so, sometimes these processes, they can be rocky, right? And they're, and that's kind of our style in Brisbane. Nothing ever goes smooth, right? It's always seems to be a controversy. But in the end, we get through it, right? And we know that a master plan is important for this site. What the ultimate, concept will be, it'll be a combination of a variety of perspectives, right? And it might be something that, we incorporate something from one group and we incorporate something from another group. So I am in favor of doing the workshop here. I will say, though, that when, Terry, when you and I were on the committee and we had that meeting out at Sierra Point and we walked around, to me, that was really helpful for me. And it seemed like it was helpful for the other committee members, too. There's something about like being at the site and starting to think about planning. Being there makes, to me, it has a huge impact. It much more so than say, at least for me, being inside a room that's separated from it. And I'm looking at pictures and diagrams and I'm photos of other places or whatever. And it's like, though that's helpful and that's part of that process, but being out there and smelling, the sea air and feeling sometimes the bite of the wind and just, or the sun on your skin, because many times it's nice out there too. And since this money is coming from a fund that, isn't our general fund, right? We put this money in there for a reason. I think that would be money well spent from this fund that goes to this ultimate goal, which is to create a great master plan, right? And of course, also the master plan is more than just the park and rec stuff, right? It's also the sea level rise resiliency.
I think that much of it, and one of the reasons we originally picked CMG was they do a lot of resiliency type of planning. And I think that that's why the original scope got a little bit spread further than what the public anticipated and what we anticipated, what we voted on, frankly. And listening to the presentation we had earlier really shows that we shouldn't be just looking at the frontage of the shoreline. It needs to, it's our whole shoreline that, is going to be impacted. And so we're taking it out of context and looking at a small piece, but we also need to have sea level protection for the marina that is there already and the amenities that are there already and the infrastructure that's there. And when we had planned originally to move the maintenance yard for the marina, and at one point they were talking about moving it right in front of the harbor master's office because BCDC would not allow it to be rebuilt at its current location. Mm-hmm. And it got moved into the upper parking lot. That wasn't an issue to take the parking from there because it was underutilized parking. And that hasn't been an issue to have the marina maintenance yard there. So a lot of the things that you learn when you walk the site and you go out and look at it are really important. Yes. And so perhaps it might be good we could even have volunteer docents, once a week, take people for a walk along the seafront, sort of do the walk we did and say, this is where we need to bring the seawall up to in order to be able to put any amenities there that are going to be compliant with BCDC. And that's going to give a realization to anyone who has an idea of what the marina could be, what first we have to do before we can place any fun stuff on it. So, you know, I see the point in making people aware of what the possibilities and the limitations of the space are. You know, so, but that takes people being made aware of what the space really is.
I'd like to comment on location. Well, I think I agree with you about, you know, being in this space really helps you think and conceptualize about it. I think that type of workshop would be more like in the discovery phase. I don't know if we feel like we're all the way back there. Like what we did with Parkside, right? So you had stickers, you had images, you were out there, you could write little comments. I think for the type of discussion that we are looking to have at this point, to me, it's something that we need really good mics for. We need the capacity for it to be recorded. And I don't see that working well out there. I think that we really need to hear directly, all of us need to hear from residents or, you know, just stakeholders in general. And I think if we have something out at Sierra Point, if it's outside, maybe the yacht club would allow us to use that space. I think it has to be an indoor space because just everyone being out there with the wind and not having adequate seating or, you know, audio visual, it's not going to give us the opportunity to really hear every single person who's making a comment. It really is only, I think, in that type of setting set up to say, I like this picture, I don't like that picture, instead of being able to make very robust comments. So, I mean, maybe the subcommittee can give us an idea of like what type of workshop you're thinking of having. If you want it to be all the way back in Discovery, or if we want to be at a place where we're really refining the vision.
If I may, if we're refining a vision, we're working off of 3 renderings that were already done. And that has been, to many people, part of the problem, in that there's not been as much opportunity to say, here's some other ideas completely different. So I think we are still kind of in a discovery phase where we're not refining plan A, B, or C that the consultant's done, but maybe trying to envision plan D, which could be something taking bits and pieces of other things.
So is that like having posters with concepts? Or is that like open mic, come and give us like your, you know, what your thoughts are and what you'd like to see?
I think we can frame this in first a discussion of what the problems are out there. What are the important considerations? What's important to people? We did that with Parkside. We've done that with the Baylands. What's important to you to start with? Not do you want this amenity, but what's important to you? So for instance, as Councilmember Cunningham said, it's important for me to go out there. It's a serenity.
Right.
It's the water, it's the wind. So to someone else is the importance to have a place of entertainment. So I think we first need to gauge what's important, site specific to Sierra Point, because you can have entertainment other places. We still have the Baylands to plan for. We have a community park, we have entertainment. Well, and I'm not saying there shouldn't be entertainment at Sierra Point, but what site specific should be there? So we need to find out. We don't want to duplicate things and have similar same things all over because we are unique. We want to have interesting features, different places. And amenities are not just entertainment or play, but they're also services. So we have to move the harbor master building. What services are important to people? What do they want to see there as services? As an example, some people wanted an area to launch kayaks. Some people may want a picnic area. I don't know that we've gone enough down that path to explore that. So I don't want to yank it back to square one. I think we're a little past it because many members of the public have already seen these plans. So they say, I love it, I hate it, or I like parts of it. But we can broaden that discussion a little bit and start refining it if we have a set of things we elicit. What are the components that people want to see there?
So if I may, one thing that might be helpful, I'm not quite sure how this could even be done, is I think that maybe we have to start with what has to be done.
Mm-hmm. Right.
We have to allow for sea level rise.
Mm-hmm.
We have to allow for saltwater intrusion. We have to allow for all these things. And so then we have this modified area that we know we have to do certain things. And then what can we do to enhance that area? Because we know we have to do the sea level rise portion of it. We can't put any buildings there in, in the area mostly of this park. We can't do any of that until we've addressed the sea level rise. And so I think that, well, it's great to say, what would you like to see? What would you like to see within these constraints of what we have? And we have to allow for that sea level rise.
And also what's practical, because someone might say, I just want to launch a kayak.
Well, and
is that practical?
Right. And sea level rise is one aspect, but have we looked at ground level or the groundwater intrusion? Because we're looking at the land and how much of that is going to have groundwater intrusion where it just becomes a soggy mess. And so then we need to think about what kind of infrastructure changes need to happen for that. In that, I know the consultant talked about wetlands, and I'm a big fan of wetlands, but I've also read a little bit having to do with one shoreline and the coast. And in many cases, they also will say wetlands aren't going to do it.
Not enough.
And there's parts of the one shoreline guidelines that deal with part of the shore on Sierra Point. Most of it looks pretty good, but part of it doesn't. So what do we need to do? Because it's one portion is going to affect all the rest. So I like your idea of looking at that as a basis.
I think when you look at CMG's work and you look at the work of other landscape architects and designers, and then the places around the bay that you go there and you go, yeah, okay, they did it right. It is a combination, right? It's not like one is separate from the other. They weave the public engagement with also the sea level rise resiliency. Of course, you got Chrissy Field. That's a perfect example. What CMG has shown in these concepts is that we can have public space along with being responsible to deal with sea level rise. Now, those concepts that they've shown, right, as you mentioned, Colleen, are for some folks in the community have been controversial, right? And so we have to listen to that. We have to respect that. In doing this additional public engagement, I think will help us get to where we need to be. You mentioned Parkside, and that was, I think, a huge success when we had the pop-up. But it was more than just, hey, we want your feedback on housing in this part of our community. It was like, we're going to have a little festival, right? We're going to bring our community together while also talking about housing, right? And I think that's what made it exciting. And so, having an event out at Sierra Point where it's more than just like, hey, we want your input, Because, like many times, I mean, look at our, no offense, but we only got one person here, right? Many times our meetings are like that. And it's just because we're talking about kind of the details, right? This workshop is going to be talking about the details. Whereas if we did some event out there, maybe we have the taco truck, maybe we have a bouncy house, some low-level entertainment things to bring families out, right? To bring other parts of our community to this site, because that's what we want. We want a diverse range of opinions.
But if we bring a taco truck and a bouncy house out to Sierra Point to get families out to look at it, unless we're planning to put a bouncy house and taco trucks out there, we're bringing them out there under false pretenses.
I don't think so. I mean, having food out at Sierra Point, I think is something that would be nice, right? Having some kind of place for kids to play, I think would be nice. Right now, that doesn't mean that that's what we would do, but I'm sure we would get some feedback from the community saying, hey, we kind of like these things. And that's part of the overall mix, right? We have to include all those voices. So that's so having that engagement at the site, I think is really important for our community to get the full flavor of what our community would ultimately like to see out there. So, we have these funds, right? We have well over $1 million, right? If we did all these things, it's only 37 out of that $1 million+ fund, right?
Well, I mean, that's not just a planning fund. That is supposed to be implementing some of it.
But you got to plan first, right? And we know that where we are right now hasn't cut the mustard, right? We still feel as a body, we need more input from the community. And so let's do it right. Let's get that input. And then when the time comes for the third task, we're ready to make a decision.
Yeah, I do think that it's important to note that we did do that stuff on Parkside. And then it was very similar to this, right? We did it in Parkside. People put their stickers, they gave their thoughts. The consultant gave 3 renderings, same thing, right? The consultant's been out there engaging the community, have they not? They've been going to Day in the Park. They've been having, multiple surveys. We've been getting the feedback. And then it comes to the renderings. And same within Parkside, we got these renderings and almost no one liked them. People said, oh, I like maybe just this one element here and just this one element there. And there was at least one rendering which had, 4 or 5 stories all the way down like Old County Road that people just freaked out about. And what happened? We totally redrew the plan. Like we
redrew it for the consultant, and then they reworked it.
And how did we do it? It was because people came to meetings and they were like, we want to have like community gardens there. It was because we had council sessions and we had a lot of people turn up. And they gave feedback on the 3 plans and said, this works, this doesn't. And then we took all that feedback and we tweaked it and we made something that made sense that the community was able to get behind. And when we did have that meeting here, we had recently about this, we had so many people here, so many people giving feedback. So I think that, yeah, we could have that type of pop up and get that type of, feedback. But I think there's also something to be said for this type of forum where people can just come and speak freely and we can all hear it at the same time. I think that
I'm not saying not to do one or the other.
I think for me that is that works a little bit different from my brain than just to see like a summary of like what people wrote. They liked this, they liked that. Because I think it allows us to have like much more follow-up with the public and the ability to kind of start to synthesize things. Because we have to begin to synthesize this into a plan, right? So I'm just concerned that maybe, I don't know how far back in this process like we go, because we have gotten a lot of feedback. We've gotten so much feedback. And then we have these plans and they're not working. So how much more
Yeah.
feedback?
I mean, you're right. I mean, like, they're not working for some folks in the community, but they are working for others, right? And so to say that it's you know, that input is not, and those concepts don't reflect the input that was given, I don't think is completely accurate. I mean, I think the consultant definitely took their kind of, you know, this is what they do for a living, right? I mean, they want to create beautiful places. And of course, that's why you hire consultants, because you appreciate their expertise. We all, you know, say, hey, make it like this or do this or that. But we really trust them to then take those bits of nuggets and then put it in and make it something beautiful. Maybe that, you know, the way that they did it was just a little bit too fast, you know, and
I think it's stakeholders. I think that actually we did a great job reaching out to families. And so many of them, like a lot of respondents said that they would like a place for kids. A lot of respondents said that they don't ever go to Sierra Point in the survey. So I think we did a great job at reaching out to people that are just maybe casual users or who rarely use the Sierra Point at all, who maybe they have young families. I think we did great at that. I think what we missed was the boaters and the people who are there, the liveaboards.
Sure.
And so that's why it doesn't work. It's not that, I mean, it's really maybe appreciated by some and not appreciated by others. So to me, that tells me it's not working, because we want to get the highest percentage of people to feel like they would use this space where they see themselves represented. So that's something for families, something for kids, something for people who want serenity, something for people who live there regularly. Focus on like infrastructure and services and things like laundry room and those types of amenities. So I think that's maybe where the misstep is.
You know, some people have a problem visualizing something that they don't know what they want. What we learned from Parkside is people are very vocal about what they hate. When they see it, and I can say a lot of times it's a process of elimination of what you hate. And then you start identifying, well, I kind of like that. And without the opportunity to have other members of the public or the boating community or people that work at Sierra Point offer some other ideas of what they'd see, we're not allowing the rest of Brisbane to go, oh, I never thought of that. Oh, hey, I like this that the consultant did, but this works really well with this person's idea. That's how we did Parkside.
And we use the 3 renderings. I think we can still use those 3 renderings, because those 3 renderings are going to give us a really good idea about what people dislike. And then you start to say, okay, you know, maybe cross this out, cross that out in these spaces. What could we do instead? And people had several ideas when we did this last time. I would say the visuals should be the plans that we have and giving people an opportunity to say what doesn't work, because that's what you said was a sticking point for people, was that they could just pick between 3 and not say, hate it all. This is why, this is what I want to see instead.
Well, they were told they could say they hated it all, but I think it's really important to not just stick to 3 renderings. I think if members of the public have other ideas, if they want to bring photographs to be displayed, that should be something we solicit in advance.
I mean,
so
Dana
that it
did
be
that.
given as much credibility, so it doesn't come across again as pick A, B, or C.
And to Councilmember Lentz's comment about seeing other parks and things that you like, most of them are not dealing with the amount of sea level and the intrusion that we have out there. Many of them are not. And many of them are stopgap because there's no infrastructure built there. It's, gradients down to shorelines that they know are going to flood, but they're not putting any structures there that are going to flood at the moment. And yes, that makes that space usable at the moment, but it's not going to be protected 15 or 20 years from now. So you can look at a space and say, yes, it's beautiful and it's a beautiful usable park, but it's not going to be addressing our sea level rise issues. So, sometimes you can, and, I've heard you refer often to Salesforce Tower and the park on top of the
Garage,
transit
yeah,
center and how beautiful it is. And it's, so out of our ballpark. It's like looking at the $20 million house and saying, oh yeah, I prefer that over my little tear down $1 million shack. So you got to compare apples to oranges and what we can afford to do and what, some of the funding that was, the cost that was written onto some of what we got on the projections of the park was, you think it's going to cost that much? No, I don't think so. But again, I'm not a construction engineer, but it's not just a simple thing to build a jetty out into the water and make a little beach for people to enter the water on the slippery rocks or rocks stepping down to the beach that kids can climb on. It's like, okay, let's go see if the kids can slip through the jetty and get stuck in their leg in there and, break their ankle. There's a lot of things that go into, yes, it'd be really cool to have that, but is it going to be practical when you look at it with the type of water, the type of sea that we have, the winds we have, and what kind of sea level rise we're going to have?
Yeah, in regards to like the Salesforce Tower, right? I like that garden. I don't associate it with Sierra Point though. I look at.
No, I'm not saying you were.
Yeah, I do kind of associate, say, Chrissy Field. Now, granted, that is a massive, site, and they've spent just probably hundreds of millions of dollars in the whole, kit and caboodle. And I'm not saying that either. But what I like about Chrissy Field is just the design element, right? And it's like, okay, what are those aspects that you like? What are those things that make you feel good, right? Because when you get right down to it, yeah, sure, we need to deal with sea level rise, but we're also, talking about a fun thing, right? This should be a fun thing, right? How do we get more people to come to Sierra Point and enjoy it? You're right. There's a lot of folks that don't come out to Sierra Point. A lot of people just, they think, oh, what's out there? Why should I go there? Right? They know it's part of town, but they just, and so having a place that is nice for us, that we encourage folks to check it out, then it becomes part of us because we really, for the most part, yes, it is nice to go on the Bay Trail, and there are those spots where it is quiet and you can go fish. But for a lot of other folks, it's just, it's like, why should I go there? Right? It doesn't have anything for them. There's no connection, even though that's part of our town. But from the renderings, and granted those concepts, right, are, got some issues with some folks, but what those concepts show is that, we can do something, right? We can do something that is, brings our citizens, brings other people from outside there. There's nothing wrong with, providing a nice public space. We go to Golden Gate Park or we go to someplace like Chrissy Field. We don't pay San Francisco taxes, but we enjoy that public space, right? Or going to the Presidio. So what I'm putting out there is this, if this have as much, community outreach as we think is necessary, right? So we don't leave any stone unturned, and then that is used for the final concept. So, yeah.
I think staff then has direction. I think I would just leave it to the subcommittee to determine. I think that you need to have a section as part of this workshop on scale. Because that came up a lot. And I think there was a real adverse reaction to using that much of our parking lots. So I think that there needs to be certain, if it's going to be station-based, we need to go back to the tape that we had. And really, we heard a lot about what people didn't like. And some of that is frustration over feeling that like the marina facilities are really inadequate. And then to hear that the city is going to dump all this money into a beautiful park and not handle what many voters feel is like very pressing maintenance issues. I think there's some of the frustration that comes from that. And there's a little education that, we're doing around that and how those things get funded. They get funded separately.
Yes.
But I think we need to go back and look at that. The subcommittee needs to review that meeting. And there were like some key elements that kept popping up, and have certain stations that are geared around scale, geared around amenities like laundry and the harbor master's office. Because I think that those amenities, there's room for improvement for sure on those things that we're going to need to address in this plan regardless. And then maybe have a section on peaceful recreation or, serenity. Have a section on recreation for kids. Because it sounds like, there's an interest in something that's could appeal, maybe some type of climbing that could appeal to young children. And then I think hone in on those certain areas or certain points of, those points of contention, right? And then have like obviously ways for people to just give, just throw something at the wall. What's your wild idea, with the information that like not every idea is feasible. Because there are a lot of things that people might want out there that just we can't, it just doesn't make sense. Could be a safety issue. So I would say that's how I would structure it. And I don't know if this is valuable, but I remember at one of the sessions with BDI, they had chunked out pieces. And you could place things to plan it out yourself. And it had like the constants, like the lagoon, right? That's not going to move. And they had, where certain areas were on the Baylands, where the train runs, and you could take certain elements and like put them on the paper. And I think that helped visually too. So, that could be something also where you could have the harbor master's office, you could have different elements, and anything that needs to be fixed obviously is not an element that's movable, but that could also start getting the public to think about how we could plan that. That's a little bit more hands-on activity.
Something in this discussion I just have to emphasize is that people think of, here's a space, and what do you put on it? How do you fill it? And what often gets lost in designing is negative space. Imagine our community park if we were going through this exercise and we said we need a climbing hill and we need a place for kids to do this, and we had all this stuff and we filled it up and we lost that beautiful big green lawn and the view of the mountain. So I think sometimes we need to pull back. The Sierra Point Park does not have to be the end all. I think we would be remiss if we don't remind people we have an enormous amount of parkland at the Baylands. We don't have to put it all in this one place. It's not like this is going to be your last chance to get what you want. If you want this, do it now, and it better be at Sierra Point, because we're going to have way more space in other places.
Frankly, the Baylands will probably come sooner than this.
Yeah.
If I can make a suggestion. So it seems like we're all in agreement about having the council workshop.
Yes.
Right? So maybe we do that. Perhaps we, I know we don't have any meetings scheduled in July. Maybe we do a date in July for the council workshop.
I have jury duty.
Okay, so I know we're off in August. Do we just like maybe be dark in July and we do something in August?
The other problem is that when you do things in the summer months, you get much lower turnout. I found like events you do in July and August, people are on vacation and they just don't show up at the rate that you want them to. I mean, I don't know how urgent this is. I would recommend like September, but or try to get something in June. It could be on a weekend.
Considering Randy is working with engineering firm about sea level rise, and some of that may affect even the interior areas with groundwater intrusion, it might be beneficial to us to have it a little later because we might have more information.
Yes, no.
So we haven't had any indication of increased pressure on the water that is within the leachate of that landfill. That's a slightly newer landfill than the one we have out at the Baylands, and we've had groundwater monitoring wells out there since it was closed in circa 1976. And we get those reports. It's been maybe a decade now that the regional board allowed them to go to annual reports instead of annual reports. So that concern may not be quite as serious out there, although it is fair to say that engineering report I'm looking at is going to be off a little bit. And I think the reason I was puzzled by the question is more not because of the question, but because how I want to respond to it, because in my mind, there is a clear demarcation between the planning for the park side of it and the planning for the marina side of it, because they're different activities. But at the same time, it's not a hard boundary. It's a soft boundary. It needs to be a transitional boundary. So I think they obviously need to be considered. You don't want it to be a jarring transition. Like,
right.
Oh my God, you went from the marina to this. You want it to be casual, easy. You want to almost notice like, I'm not in the marina anymore. I'm over here at the park. It's really lovely. It's nice. That's the way we're trying to do it. But certainly I hear the council's concerns, and we've had the same experience when we've tried to do outreach for public works, is that people in the summer are busy. Their kids are out of school, they're going to Disneyland, they're doing all sorts of fun things. And
Also, the weather is not great. Like, we all forget this. That August is horrible. It's so windy down there. And so is July. Mid-September is really when we get our best weather. We had our first, or that really big heat wave, right? It was on Labor Day weekend. So I'm not saying that's the weekend to do it, but we had a stretch of just incredible weather in September last year. And if you want to have an event where people are going to come and spend some time, I think, like, why not have the space shine in the best possible?
I agree.
The best possible weather where we're
That
really
is the best time of
Indian summer.
weather, and that is not indicative of what
That's
it's like
true.
year round.
I mean, that's true.
You know, we could
Can I
hold it
just-
on, a mid-December day, and it could be 75 degrees and beautiful, or it could be, terrible.
Mayor, what I heard earlier was that you wanted to have the community meeting here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I said here, but Cliff said there.
No, I think both, right? We do one here, and then we would have a community engagement, like an event out at Fair Point. That's part of
The first meeting would be here.
First meeting to be here,
Okay.
yeah.
Let's get
Does
through that
make-
one first.
Does that make
So
sense?
can I just suggest, great conversation, but I think it's going to take some effort to pull this together. What I would suggest is that staff work with the subcommittee, try to put together the format for this meeting, work with the consultant, and then bring that back to the council before we actually do the meeting so that everybody's on the same page in terms of how the meeting's going to be organized.
Okay.
So it would, at the earliest we would have it in the fall.
Yeah.
So we think that it makes more sense to do a council meeting style workshop before people looking at elements.
Well, I think the idea was to do a horseshoe
Right,
setup in here.
right, in here.
And then I think we could work with the subcommittee in terms of, a lot of you came came forward with ideas of how that should be organized. So we can put together some ideas and have the full council weigh in on that.
Okay. So are we ready to move on then?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Come up to
Come
the-
up, you have to come up to the mic.
Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. It's so strange to be saying those words, but I appreciate your giving me this opportunity to just say a few things before you go any farther with this process and not get off the rails again the way that it happened the first time around. Start with the fact that you're dealing with a marina, and it's a community. I've heard that word a lot of times. It's a neighborhood, just like some of the neighborhoods up here. And that's where this process should begin. Start with the marina and then work out from there. And the best way to do that is to reach out to the boaters, and the yacht club can be a starting point. We don't represent all of the boaters, but we've got a facility where they can all come to, and we can get the word out to them. It seems to me you really should start with a meeting of the boaters before you start trying to do a meeting of the whole community on this. So please keep that in mind. This is a community, it's a neighborhood, and it's a lot more than just a bunch of rich people with expensive toys. So it's a marina, it's a cash cow for the recreation department. It's so many things, but that's where this process really should start. So before you go any further, please, at this point, get some feedback from the boaters ourselves, please. Thanks.
Didn't you have a meeting with the boaters at the yacht club? And then didn't you have a separate meeting with some people who had boats specifically?
I think I understand, Mr. Panza, what you're saying. I would just add that it is a neighborhood, but the fact that there's people that work out there and there are residents who live in central Brisbane or the Ridge that will also use the area, it's probably also good for the boaters to hear what other people have to say, because as Randy points out, it's not just, oh, here's the wall, here's the marina, and here's this park. We want this transition where they are compatible. And you can't get compatible if you're only talking to one group of people. I think we really need to bring everyone together.
Oh, certainly.
To
I'm
have
not
that
saying not to.
conversation.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
start with the primary stakeholders and then expand to the whole community.
Well, we kind of have. I'd like to see them come talk to the rest of the group so that the rest of Brisbane hears what they have to say. When we just talk to them alone, the rest of Brisbane doesn't hear what they have to say. And everyone else needs to hear their concerns.
Oh, I fully agree. And I say, have the big meeting of the whole community, but start by really understanding how that marina works and how the people that use that marina work and what we need. Start with that first and then expand to the whole community where we can provide that kind of feedback to the rest of the community and hear other people's feelings about this. Certainly we need that dialogue, but start with understanding what you've got and what we need to do to serve that community. We did have a meeting out there at the yacht club with the consultant, and I haven't heard any kind of feedback from that, but we also were asked to put together a committee within the yacht club to start meeting with Noreen or the consultant or somebody. That process just doesn't seem to have gone any farther. So please, before you go too much farther, let's understand what the marina is and the primary stakeholders, what we need. Then move on to the rest of the community as a whole. Thanks.
Are you also referencing the access? I know access came up a lot, where designing a park where then the boaters had to wade through a park to get to the actual docks was not, in their mind, a very equitable way to accommodate what they do. And that was something that I don't think everyone thought of with a park, that there are people carrying equipment, oftentimes from they park a car and they've got a lot of gear they're going to take out on the boat. And you don't want to go over a climbing hill to get to the dock carrying 100 pounds of equipment. So we need to think about how to integrate those things.
Yeah, and the only way to really understand that is hearing it from the boaters themselves. I mean, those three concept plans degraded the marina. You start with that and expand and develop from there. But what we saw was starting by degrading what you had. So.
And Lee, let me just also just mention, I appreciate you coming to, to speak with us, and, this input is valuable. One of the items that's on our list in that bucket of additional funding, it's the third one down. It says convening of a marina facilities focus group comprised of Sierra Point Yacht Club members and Brisbane Marina berth holders. So that thing that that group that you talked about, that's, if we're going to agree to that, it would, we'd have to put some additional funds into it. So if that's something that, we're going to have a meeting with the subcommittee and make recommendations to the full council based on that. And your feedback is really important in that process.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's critical. I mean, it sounds like that's something that's already been discussed with this group.
Yeah, it's a recommendation, right? All these things have been discussed, and they're, but they're going to cost more money. And so do we want to put in the $37,000 to do these things? That's what it's about.
I'm not sure we want to do all those things. I think that we've been calling this the Sierra Point Park Master Plan. It's really the Marina Park Master Plan.
That's right.
Because the marina is the focus down there. Otherwise, we call it Industrial Park Master Plan. I mean, we need to, that is the focal feature of that space, is the marina and the water. And that's the intrinsic value of that space. So I think we've been sort of going at it from the wrong way to create a park at a marina when we really want to be enhancing the marina to be more park-like.
That's exactly what I was saying, Terry. Thank you.
So I guess looking at this, we all said we wanted to do an active working session with the full council.
Yes.
But it also is additional on-site engagement at Sierra Point in the form of a community-wide event.
That's if we do the whole, and I'm not sure she's asking for the entire budget right at this point, but I do think we need to do the portion of it where we get more community engagement and we look at it more from a sea level marina park outlook than we do from creating a park that has different amenities for all sorts of different people. We want to attract people that want to come to the waterfront. It's a waterfront park.
No disagreement there. So yeah, so I think we agreed to move forward with the active working session, and then that based on Clay's recommendation that the subcommittee would then see how we would organize these additional items. But
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And I think at this point, we should have contacts with lots of different groups of stakeholders that staff can reach out to directly to invite to that working group.
Yes.
Great,
When we get it scheduled.
right, okay. Item M, let's do it fast. Good thing there's not really a list, right? It's just kind of one.
It's just, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Give us one
And so the reason there's just one, and I sort of teased you into it at the last meeting, is that my understanding after city manager talked with Supervisor Canepa is that he wants a capital project. He wants something enduring. We think that something that's consistent with the climate action plan. We spent all this time tonight talking about sea level rise. Makes good sense. And the reason in particular on this project is that we went into this thinking that we could have a slightly smaller project and that we could keep the existing gas boiler heater and to use it in a piggyback mode, to use it in an only as needed mode. And we thought it was gonna be a rare time. When we took that to the engineering division, the California Public Utilities Commission, the Energy Commission, they shut us down. They said, nope, you have to go to complete electrification if you're gonna get the funds we need. So we looked at what complete electrification means, and it adds a lot of money to the project. So staff is busy running around. We're having a lot of conversations. with Peninsula Clean Energy. We're having some other conversations with the consultant, but we could certainly use this $200,000 as a supplement to the money that we're already putting into it. It would be, I think it would go a long way to leveraging the funds, because every time you capture more funds and you can demonstrate to other people you're trying to get money from, in this particular case, we'd be trying to get more from PCE primarily, that can say, oh, okay, so you've got enough funding on board that we're not carrying the whole load. So that would be my recommendation to you, that you give direction to the city manager to put this project identified in the staff report to Supervisor Canepa.
Does anyone have any questions?
I thought Canepa wanted a pump track.
Are you baiting me, sir?
You know, he reached out to us, right? And he said, you know, you ever thought about doing a pump track? That's what he said. He says, the county just did one. And so I was like, well, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned that. So.
I heard that one.
No, he left it to us.
Yeah. Okay.
Sadly, I do not have one design, nor do I have the environmental review to put that on Crocker Trail, sir.
I'm just saying. I'm just
I
curious.
say heating the pool's a good idea.
I agree.
Okay, so
Vote?
is everyone on board with this? I think it's just direction.
I take the direction.
The directions, yes.
It's clear.
Okay, so it's almost 10:30. Let's hurry up and see if we can get out of here super fast. Do you have a report to give?
Just one item, just a reminder that the IDEA Committee, Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Accountability will be having an event in the park this Saturday from 10 a.m. to noon. This is the first of a series of events called the #WeAreBrisbane series, and you can buy a T-shirt if you'd like. Celebrate the diversity in our city and the importance of building community through sharing of arts, culture, food, music, and recognize Asian, American, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. You can go on to brisbaneca.org/AAPI to get tickets. And I do know that tickets are going briskly.
Can we roll item O over to just one big report out next meeting?
Sure.
Okay. And if everyone's amenable to that, we'll go ahead and do that. Oral communications number 2. Anyone else wishing to speak at this time?
I see no hands raised, Madam Mayor.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting at 10:30.
Madam Mayor, I do want to note that we did receive written correspondence.
Okay. We'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting at 10:30.